Okay, in this last video over the course, I'm going to briefly chat about what comes next. And the answer to that question is really who the hell knows? I mean, anyone that kind of is claiming they know what's going to happen in the future around all the things we've been talking about in the course and that kind of stuff, with any overt confidence, I think is probably a grifter of some, some respect or is probably leaving out a bunch of possibilities. Um, you can probably tell throughout the course. And I'm a kind of skeptic about whether these things are doing more harm than good or good than harm. Like feels to me at the moment that it's more detrimental to humans' kind of conviviality and flourishing than not. But of course, there's examples of how it's good for that kind of thing as well. Um, so there is what I find interesting about what's going on in terms of the future at the moment is the kind of notion of the how the AI apocalypse has become very front and center in terms of how we're thinking what's going on here. Um, and that's often very much promoted by key figures in the industry, including CEOs of companies like Anthropic that are making AI and LLMs and stuff. And there's an example there you can click on. I think the idea of some kind of Terminator-esque apocalypse is probably a bit overblown. My prediction is that we'll come to see that LLMs, for instance, won't be the be all and end all of everything, and they'll probably kind of fall back in terms of importance and just be used as a tool in various settings where they are actually useful. And I'm also very skeptical of the idea of general artificial intelligence. As many critics have pointed out, the big tech bro is kind of pointing out that arguing that like AI is going to kill us all seems to be as much a kind of propaganda to make it sound incredibly important and to position the industry as too big to fail or a way of kind of wrangling more dollars to, under the guise of making it safe, even though that's definitely not what they're spending it on. And you can see aspects of this playing out in the kind of trials going on around, who's going to control AI in the future with Musk suing AI and Sam Altman in particular, and claims that this company should be a public good and it shouldn't be privatized and it shouldn't be for profit. Whole bunch of ironies and hypocrisies going on there that kind of I think are quite representative of the industry as a whole. But again, I think the apocalyptic visions are probably overblown. But as I pointed out throughout the course, I think the way that these things affect power relations means that, you know, maybe what we would call the ruling class, in terms of these tech overlords and the way they've now increasingly incorporated themselves into nation states and governments, has seen as much, or if not more, influence over everyone's lives and as much kind of money and power shifting upwards as there ever has been before. So again, in terms of we're at a point in history here where what comes next, I think, is unknown. But the way things are going at the moment is power is being definitely concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. Um, in terms of the here and now, though, like there's a real immediate concern about the economy. Um, the way that we kind of decide whether the economy is doing well or not through the notion of economic growth and GDP and stuff like that seems to be almost exclusively attached to the AI industry and the kind of more and more investment in it and the kind of incredibly problematic building of data centers, both environmentally and financially. The companies themselves, as that kind of bubble diagram there, I think that's about 6 months old now, and there's been all kinds of weird deals happen since. They're increasingly kind of funding each other in a way that kind of very much looks like a bubble. And there's many predicting that it's going to be a huge financial crash coming in the near future that's going to be even bigger than the 2008 subprime crisis. Others argue that like it will be a huge crash, but like it's not going to be as bad because some of the companies will survive, some won't. It's likely those that predict that think that like the bigger already existing kind of social media tech giants and other tech giants, Amazon and Meta are the ones likely to survive, and because they actually have, and Microsoft, because they already have other things to kind of prop them up, and will probably then incorporate things like OpenAI and Anthropic into their own companies or whatever. But like, who knows? And what's particularly important at the moment is Nvidia. Nvidia, the chip maker, seems to underwrite everything that's going on. And as soon as there could be some kind of if their supply lines ever get threatened and the production of chips slow down, that's a kind of another real problem in terms of financial crashes in the future. So the AI bubble, AI industry is really kind of very much tied to everyone's financial interests at the moment, whether we like it or not. The financial kind of sector is obsessed with kind of pouring more and more money into it. And so this can have all kinds of effects on our day-to-day lives in the future that are kind of some predictable in some ways and maybe not so much in others. What's interesting about predicting the future from a social scientific perspective is that for the most part, I think sociologists are kind of more often than not reluctant to do the kind of prediction stuff. We kind of tend to see people that call themselves futurists as grifters, really, and tend to point out that more often than not they're telling people a particular future and that they want to hear, particularly if they're trying to, get a role as speakers and trying to make money and stuff like that. But there has been sociologists in the kind of recent past that have tried to do this. John Urry had a number of works in the kind of 2000s and 2000 teens kind of years before he unfortunately passed away around climate change and predicting what was going to happen and trying to deal with what was happening and what is happening around climate change. And he had this kind of three-pronged predictions of the future between local sustainability, digital networks of control, and regional warlordism, pointing out that maybe any one of these three futures could come to dominate, or that maybe they could all kind of be existing at once. And I would say that's much more likely. And we can see various kind of social movements around the world trying to get back to small as beautiful, cutting back on their consumption and all this kind of stuff. Certainly, digital networks of control have been pretty much what this course has been about. And then the kind of notion that, like, once climate change hits, that there'll be a kind of regional warlordism that'll kind of look like The Road or Mad Max or Children of Men. So if you're interested in that, it's a little bit dated now. I think that book came out about 2013, but it's a very interesting book to kind of think about the way that technologies kind of lock us in. They make us path dependent on various futures. Um, and then predicting that future needs to kind of think about how that path is going to play out. Ari in the book uses the car, for instance. The mention of the car, for instance, had huge influence on the design of cities, huge infrastructures around this kind of individualized technology. And that's having some issues today in terms of the way, gridlock and the way public transport politics plays out. A similar thing we can start thinking about, I think, in terms of platform capitalism in the future is the way that data, algorithms, AI are locking us in to various futures as well. So I think those three options are interesting ways of thinking about what may or may not happen. But as I said, it's more likely to be a combination of those things. And in going back to what I pointed out earlier in the course, more recently, Forcade and Healy have been particularly influential in thinking about the ordinal society and what all this stuff means. And they sketched out two possible futures around the kind of data self that will increasingly be that cyborg self, algorithmically augmented, or there'll be a kind of this parallel disembodied society going on, where our data zombies are kind of living their own life, but kind of also fundamentally influencing the life chances and opportunities and discriminations and marginalizations and inequalities that we experience in our own lives. And again, I think those kind of models offer us ways to imagine what may or may not happen. Certainly not going to be some kind of sociological law. That's not necessarily what's going to happen. And again, I think aspects of those things are much more likely to be happening at the same time. So at the conclusion of a course like this, I hope that everyone that's been doing it has been able to kind of go through a kind of learning trajectory where I've tried to make the normal look strange through that kind of sociological lens throughout. The way that digital cultures have fundamentally reinvented and transformed the way we consume, the way we live our lives. And I hope the concepts and the research and the various things that I've been presenting in the course are helping you understand, what's happening now and what may happen in the future, and hopefully as well inform the politics of the way that you go about your everyday life. Okay, thanks. I'll leave the course there.